Natasha, welcome along to the podcast. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Jason. It's great to be here.
We are talking about your research paper that is being released, and it's on the topic of what is school for. Now, this is kind of a deep philosophical kind of exploration into the underlying reasons of why we educate our kids. Why choose this? Like, we're looking at education as a whole. Why choose this particular kind of subgenre here of looking at why?
I think the simple answer to that question is that I'm currently studying philosophy. So unfortunately,
it's your natural bent to the philosophical
right.
question.
First principles and definitions, they're extraordinarily important to argumentation. And when we were discussing these education issues in the office, the first thing that came to mind was, well, are we not accomplishing the objectives of education because we don't know what they are?
Yeah. And so you went hunting for
just the narrative, I guess, of historically what have been the different reasons for instituting school, for funding school. What are the different influences that have made their way into the approach that we take to education? So that was basically.
And how the why has changed over time. Is that something you found?
Changed, morphed. Yeah. Grown, expanded.
A lot of expansion.
Mostly expansion.
Oh, and so with this issue, we all think education is, not doing so well. We get regular reports of declining literacy and numeracy, NCEA failures, university dropping out, post-COVID, but we know that the trend has been happening for about 10 years in New Zealand now. When you looked at this issue, why do we educate our kids? How bad did you find it?
I think it was worse than I anticipated, both for just a lack of clarity amongst the different aspects of the institution that is education. So that's from the ministry to the government that's kind of driving changes, but also the different teaching institutions and the schools themselves. A real lack of clarity to
at each
an
of
answer
those
to that.
levels, they may have multiplicity of different answers to the question. Sometimes
they're not actually answering the question of what is school for, but just kind of speaking out an ethereal hope.
Like a nice goal.
But not a measurable one.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really crucial issue with policy. Is if you can't measure the outcomes, if you can't test to see that if you're accomplishing your aims, it's really hard to justify continuing on with it.
Fund it.
I think we have to, that when we're talking about universal education, we're talking about state-funded education.
Our tax
dollars. Are we getting our bang for our buck? We're not talking about the home or small communities creating cultural institutions because of something that they're passionate about in a way that they want to impart things to their children. We're talking about the government seeing a national objective. And are they accomplishing that objective? Do they even know what that objective is anymore?
Or do they?
It was very clear when the law was first passed to create universal education in the 1800s in New Zealand. It was very clear what they were hoping to accomplish. I think it's much, much less clear now.
Yeah. So worse than we thought in terms of people. So it seems that everyone thinks they know, but no one really agrees on what it is.
That's right.
That education's doing.
Okay. We agree that education is good. We just don't know, even if we know why education is good and that it's the formation of young people, we don't actually know what we want to form in them or what our priorities are in that space. I think we can all, and I think this was the other aspect of it, is there were lots of different answers to this question. It wasn't that there was no answer to the question, but can a schooling system that's based on 5 days a week, 4 hours a day, actually accomplish all of the different things that we're requiring of it? And I would say not well.
As is shown, right, throughout our evidence. So it's worse than you thought. Was there anything else that kind of surprised you in this as you were researching? Maybe the expanding nature of it, or the fact that we expect so much of schools? I think the expansion, certainly. The fact that so even as at the time of writing, both Labour and National released some of their education objectives for the upcoming election, and for both of them, it was an add-on. So let's also require schools to provide financial literacy. Let's also require schools to deal with cell phone usage or banning or
addiction. And again, how much do we really think schools can accomplish in the limited time that they have and the limited, teaching resource that they have? I think it was the government announced that they wanted to increase a focus on skills in, writing and reading and mathematics. And the teachers' union said, we're going to have to implement some retraining for that. And it's like, well, how did that fall off the agenda?
How did the reading, writing, and maths fall off the training?
And I think they would argue, well, it didn't.
Yeah.
But we had to train for all of these other things, so we just kind of lost focus on that one. It's like, well, maybe that was the priority all along, and we should have been focusing on that, particularly if we're going to abuse this government and previous governments for not accomplishing that objective.
Yes.
Then we really need to pull focus on it again.
Yeah. So that's quite a good point. If we're going to say, well, this government has failed because our literacy rates are falling, but it started 10 years ago, so the last 2 governments have failed because of this. Well, then you need to ask the question, were we actually focusing on that, or were we focusing on adding, like you say, financial literacy or cell phone management or other things into the mix?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so then should we, if it's that important, bring the focus back? And would you like to see some jettisoning of some of these policies and requirements on schools?
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm in this paper, I don't put forward what I think the purpose of school should be.
Yeah.
Because I think this is a question that individuals need to ask of themselves, particularly if you're sending your children to school. You should probably be thinking about what's your answer to this question.
Yeah.
And then you should be campaigning for it.
Yeah.
I think that if, we're in a democracy, our school system represents the will of the public. So what do the public actually want?
So ideally the school system should be teaching our children what we want our children to learn.
That's
because
right.
We have campaigned, put forward the parties have put forward policy, we've discussed it, voted on it, and they've implemented it.
And then we can test it.
Yeah.
Because we've said, well, this is, we're going to focus on this for the next however long and really nail that down. And I think, it's important to note that many of these different purposes are, they work together. So when you improve a child in their personal development, you're also helping with their academic capacity. When you improve their academic capacity, you're improving their job outcomes. So it's not to say, let's jettison all these things and not pay any attention to them.
4 hours of reading, writing, and arithmetic.
That's right. But it's just figuring out, well, can we rank the priorities somehow and say, this is the thing, we have 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. Where are we going to spend most of our time? And then what other nice things would we like to add?
So ideally you'd like to see different people or groups of people come up with their own list of, this is what school's for, prioritize it, put it forward, let's debate it, discuss it. Well, here's some overlap, here's where we can put some money, here's some things we could take away. Let's come up with a system that we think works mostly well for everyone. Of course, in a democracy you never please everyone, but you can get optimal outcomes, and then implement it, test it, refine it, and go from there.
Absolutely. I think, acknowledging that there are special character schools, so it may be that for some people in a certain area, there's some other element that really, really matters to them.
Yeah.
It could be tereo, it could be a faith-based special interest, and it's actually really good, I think, for those different groups to have their own education kind of framework or but again, still focusing on the core issues, but what else can we have linked to that?
Cool. So what can people do other than, I guess, come up with their own definition? How can they put that into the conversation, maybe?
So I think it's really important that we have really productive conversations with our educators, and I think also really pay attention to our children and see what's going on in their schools. I think for many parents, I think that a couple of things have happened. The way that we've advertised schooling has implied that parents have very little to impart to their children and have a very small role in their life outcomes.
Just get them to school.
Get them to school. That's your responsibility. And I think that that's really been detrimental on a number of levels. First of all, parents don't feel like they can comment on their children's education. And so even if they're seeing something that they're not liking at school, they don't know how to fix it. They don't know if it's even possible to fix it. They don't know how to articulate it. And so they just kind of keep sending their child to school. What could they do? Where else could they send them? I think that's a real struggle for parents. But I also think COVID revealed how ill-equipped families and communities are to actually spend time with children.
Yeah.
And I think particularly, when you look at the vision statement for the Ministry of Education, which they have recently taken down off their website the last couple of weeks, which was a little bit of a bummer for my paper. But at the time that I wrote this, they did have, is strong in their national and cultural identity is one of the key objectives of learning. I don't see how a school system, 5 days a week, 4 hours a day, can possibly compensate for the lack of any sort of cultural impartation at home.
Yeah.
If you're not gaining language, if you're not gaining culture and responsibility to participate in culture in your home and in your community surrounding you at home, I don't see how schools could possibly be responsible for that. But it's clearly something we want.
Yeah, especially given that there may be no one at that school who's from that particular culture or place, who can do that. So what are you going to do?
That's right. And I think, we don't want to be in a position where children don't have anything to go home to.
Yeah.
But because of the way that we weight schooling, and I think this is the overlap between school and welfare, the fact that the government sees the schooling system as a means for providing welfare for students who aren't getting it at home. Again, we're shifting the responsibility away from the home community to the school community, which can't possibly compensate.
Yeah.
And I understand the practical realities of that. But I also think one of the important things that people need to acknowledge is the fact that utopia is not possible.
Yeah.
There is a limited amount of time. There are limited resources. We're going to have to focus on some things at the expense of other things. And that also means that what serves the majority of children may not be in the best interests of some small minority of children. And that's a really difficult thing to grapple with, but that is the reality of government. And we have to come up with creative ways to help to cater for the people who are being left behind at the same time as we continue to improve the situation for the majority.
Yeah. Oh, big thoughts as we go into the election on education. Thanks for being with us, Natasha.
Thanks, Jason.